Hello to all of you. I really wish you were all here with me in my house because I miss you all. But today is day 3 of my I Survived the Titanic read aloud. Roy has been extremely eager to find out what is going to happen to George and Daisy and Phoebe. But before I start, I have some special hellos I want to say to some of my friends who I've heard from. So I want to say hi to AJ and Mia. I want to say hi to Ben and Henry and to Sean. And I want to say hi to Ryan. So hi to all of you, and let's get started. So we're on chapter 5 today. Oh, I know I had to tell you, I heard a really cool thing yesterday. Some kids are reading, as I'm reading, they're following along with the book. Others are following along with this graphic novel, which is the same story, but in a graphic novel. So I just thought that was a really neat way to read a graphic novel, to be listening to a read aloud, but to be following along with the same story in a graphic novel. So I just had to add that because I thought that was extra cool. Okay, chapter 5. At dinner that night, Aunt Daisy raised her glass. To George, no trouble for an entire day. They clinked their glasses together just as an old man stopped by their table. Mrs. Key, the man said to Aunt Daisy, I've been meaning to say hello. Mr. Stead, Aunt Daisy said, what a pleasure. This is George, my nephew, and Phoebe, my niece. Mr. Stead said hello. So, Aunt Daisy said, what brings you onto this magnificent ship? Oh, I couldn't miss it, he said. I think all of society is on this ship. I hear there's even an Egyptian princess on board. Really, Aunt Daisy said, I haven't met her. Well, none of us had, Mr. Stead said. She's traveling in the first-class baggage room. Excuse me, Aunt Daisy said. The princess is more than 2,500 years old, Mr. Stead said. George's ears perked up. I'm not sure I understand, Aunt Daisy said. She's a mummy, Mr. Stead said. A mummy? Phoebe gasped. That's right, Mr. Stead said, from a tomb near Thebes. I understand she belongs to a man named Mr. Burroughs. People are saying he sold the coffin to the British Museum. Then he packed the princess herself up in a wooden crate. Apparently he's bringing her back for his collection. Some say it's bad luck to take a mummy from its tomb. I'm glad I'm not the superstitious type, Aunt Daisy said. Mr. Stead chuckled. In any case, nothing can harm this ship, not even the curse of the mummy. Mr. Stead tipped his hat and said goodbye. Mr. Stead is a very famous writer in England, Aunt Daisy said. You never know who you'll meet on the Titanic. And then it hit George. The best idea ever. That mummy! He had to see it. Maybe this day wasn't so boring after all. Wonder what's going to happen. Chapter 6. I guess I did a little foreshadowing there. You know what that means? Think about that. It means I'm sort of giving you a little hint of something that might happen. George didn't tell Phoebe or Aunt Daisy about his plan. He figured he'd head down to the first-class baggage room after they all went to sleep. He'd find Mr. Burroughs' crate, pry it open, and take a quick peek at the mummy. He'd be back in bed and snoring away before anyone knew he was gone. It was almost 11:15 when Phoebe was finally asleep and the light was out under Aunt Daisy's door. George crept out of bed. He quickly got dressed and put his knife in his pocket. Remember his knife? That was something he had gotten as a special present. He'd need it for prying open the lid of the crate. And who knew? Maybe there was a live cobra in the box too. George could hope, couldn't he? George opened the door and peeked into the hallway. He wanted to avoid Henry, who seemed to have eyes in the back of his bright orange head. He wouldn't like George creeping around so late at night. But the hallway was quiet. There was no noise at all except for the quiet hum of the engines rising up from the bottom of the ship. George loved that noise. It made him think of crickets in the woods at night. In fact, being out here all by himself reminded him of the nights at home when he sneaked into the woods while Papa and Phoebe were asleep. He'd head out when his mind was filled with restless thoughts about why Papa was always mad at him or why he didn't try harder at school. And of course, Mama. Almost 3 years had passed since she'd passed away. George tried not to think about her too much, but some nights when he closed his eyes, he'd remember her smile or her smell when she hugged him close, like fresh grass and sweet flowers, or that song she'd sing to wake George up in the morning. Awake, awake, it's now daybreak, but don't forget your dreams. Thinking about Mama was like standing close to a fire, warm at first, but get too close and it hurt too much. Much better to stay clear of those thoughts. And nothing cleared George's mind quicker than being in the woods. He never stayed out for more than an hour or two, except for that night back in October. George was heading back toward home when he heard a terrible sound like a little girl screaming. He turned around, and in the dark distance he saw two glowing eyes. Some old-timers said that there were black panthers in the woods, but George never believed it. But as those yellow eyes got closer, George could see the outline of a huge cat with two glistening fangs. George told himself not to run. He knew he'd never outrun the panther, but he couldn't help it. He ran as fast as he could. Branches cut his face, and he didn't slow down. Any second, the panther would leap up and tackle George. Its claws would tear him apart. George could feel the cat right behind him. He could smell its breath like rotting meat. George grabbed a fallen branch. He turned and waved it in front of him. The panther lunged and grabbed the branch with its jaws. George let go of the stick and scrambled up a tree, climbing as high as he could go. The cat dropped the branch and came after him like a shadow with glowing eyes. Here's a picture. George pulled out his knife. He waited until the cat's paws were on a small branch just below him, and then, with all his might, he chopped the branch with his knife. Crack! The branch broke free. The giant cat tumbled through the air, screaming and crashing through the branches, and then it hit the ground with a thud. There was a silence, and then the cat stood up. It looked at George for a long moment, and it turned and walked slowly back to the woods. George stayed up in the tree until it was just about light and made it to bed just before Papa woke up. His friends at school refused to believe that George when he told them, even when he swore on his heart. No way, big fat lie. Next thing you'll be saying you've been signed up by the Giants. Their laughter rose up around George, but it didn't bother him, because right then he realized that it didn't matter what they thought. George knew he'd face down the panther, and he'd never forget it. So that's the end of my read aloud for today. I will begin with chapter 7 tomorrow. And if any of you have questions or anything in your mind about this story, there are ways you could ask your mom or whoever is watching over you to get in touch. You could email me, or you could have your parents post on Twitter or Facebook, because I really want to hear what you're thinking. And if you want to shout out tomorrow, let me know. Have a great day, everyone.